All right, now we come to living in the depression, and this is the first one. This is losing it all. Okay? First off, remember rugged individualism. A lot of non-profit organizations, YMCA, Salvation Army, are going to provide bread lines and soup kitchens. Now, the bread line, there's actually an iconic picture, and you can see it kind of back there. There's one that says world's highest standard of living, and someone driving a car, and you have a bread line lined in front of it, and that means they're unemployed. And so bread lines and soup kitchens were a free meal, and for a lot of families, it actually meant the difference between life and death, and actually getting out of these things, out of this horrible situation, okay? Now, as they lost their job, they're standing there, and you don't pay your rent, you will be evicted. So a lot of families will be evicted from their home. They'll receive this eviction notice. So what do you do now? You don't have a job, you don't have a house. Where do you go? You went and you created a makeshift village called a shanty town. They kind of nicknamed these Hoovervilles. You can imagine why they're blaming Herbert Hoover. Now, shanty towns generally were within urban areas, either near railroads or near factories, and because looking for jobs. And they would go and basically pander for jobs and wait, and their families are in these horrible conditions, and it leads to something else that we'll talk about here at the end. Now, two more examples of how they blamed Hoover. You would cover up at night with a newspaper, and you would call that a Hoover blanket. And if you hung your pockets inside out to show you had no money, you said you were flying your Hoover flag. And so this all does not look good on Hoover, does it at all? Now, as this continues, socialism is already here, and a lot of people said we need to organize, we need to fight back at the system. And so socialism makes a return here, and they actually had a series of hunger marches in which they would more or less kind of deprive themselves food and march with the idea that they would fight or starve. And so this is actually a fairly interesting mode and where they went. Now, some people, some men, this was a little bit too much for them, and they would snap and they would leave their family and become a hobo. Now, hobo had been a way of life for many, many years, but it just basically meant you rode the rails, you kind of fended for yourself, and you're looking for money and family. Now, hobos had a unique code, and maybe you can see some of them. I'll show you a video in class, and it was everything from police are here to you can get a free meal, etc. And if you follow any of those serial killer things, there's actually a hobo serial killer, and that's the man's picture there. He actually killed somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 men that were hobos, and I mean, it's kind of shocking, I know. So a lot of these people would leave their family in these kind of desperate conditions and kind of go on the lam and make it on their own, hoboing it, okay? But that's verse 1 for living in the depression.